One common ultimate question is, where did human life come from? Or further, what is the purpose of human life? Jewish scholars in the 7th to 10th centuries collected the scriptures of what we now know as the Torah or Old Testament. Genesis, the first book of the Jewish Torah and Christian Bible, gives two accounts of where the world and life comes from. Here are some questions to consider when analyzing a passage of scripture. Who wrote it? When was it written? Who was it written for? What style was it written in? Pause the video now and read Genesis from the beginning to chapter 2 verse 4. Keep it open so you can refer to it. So you've read the creation story, but how do we analyze it? Is it written as a literal or scientific account of creation? We will come back to these questions, but first we will summarize the meaning of this passage. The opening line begins, "In the beginning, when God created the heaven and earth." This assumes the existence of God. In this account, God exists before the world is created. Moreover, it claims that God created the world, meaning that the world is separate from God. God transcends the world and everything in it. Many interpret this to imply that God is eternal. God was not created, but always existed. In this account, God is perceived to be omnipotent and majestic, hovering over the dark waters, and effortlessly speaking creation into being. The key part for our ultimate question is probably that quoted on your screen. God creates humans in God's image. Man and woman are created at the same time. God gives humans dominion or power over the rest of creation. These humans are not named. The focus of the passage is on God. Notice how the tone changes in 2, verse 2, when God rests from the work. This moves towards a more physical understanding of God. God is tired from the work of creation. Let us return to the questions we posed at the beginning. Who wrote it? A bit of background here. Scholars think there are three traditions of writers of Genesis, which they call J, E, and P. Note that although these are spoken about as one writer, they are more likely a collection of writers. The story was written by P, the priestly tradition, emphasizing the nature of God. When was it written? This may be the first story in the Torah, but it is not the oldest. Scholars date it after 722 BCE. It was probably written in the 6th century BCE. This account shows influences of creation stories from Egypt and Mesopotamia, with the chaos existing before creation. Unlike those stories, this account has one God creating, rather than many. Who was it written for? It has been suggested that perhaps it was written to encourage the Hebrews after they were conquered by the Assyrians and were exiled in Babylon. What style is it written in? This passage is poetic. If you read it back, you will see that even in the English translation, it has a natural rhythm. It could have been intended to be sung. Hebrew poetry often uses repetition. What repetition can you find in the passage? This account of creation emphasizes its order. Pause the video now and read Genesis chapter 2 verse 2 to chapter 3 verse 24. Keep it open to refer back to it. Again, let us begin with a summary of what this passage is saying. Unlike chapter 1, this account gives no time periods or days of creation. The order of creation is different. Humans are created before animals. Animals are created for the purpose of being a helper to man, but are found to be lacking. The focus of this passage is clearly on humans rather than God, but it takes a different understanding of God to chapter 1. God, rather than speaking life into creation, breathes life into Adam physically. God is anthropomorphic. Not only does God feel sympathy for Adam's loneliness, but God walks in the Garden of Eden. The human, Adam, in Hebrew the word Adam means man, is made from the earth. The word earth in Hebrew is Adamah, so there is a play on words here. The woman, Eve, in Hebrew the word for life, is made from Adam, the man. The second story is exploring the relationship between humans and the earth. Humans are made from the earth, and they are given the Garden of Eden to tend. So we turn to the same questions to analyze this story. Who wrote it? This story is attributed to the J tradition of writers, who name God Yahweh. This name we see translated as Lord in the English translations. When was it written? Scholars believe this to be the oldest part of the Torah, written sometime before chapter 1, potentially in the 9th or 10th centuries BCE. Around this time, Israel was under the control of King Solomon and was a powerful nation. Who was it written for? This account attempts to explain human issues. In chapter 3 you will see J goes on to attempt to explain the issues of sin, childbirth and suffering. What style is it written in? This is clearly not poetic like chapter 1, but we have seen it uses puns, such as that on the word Adam. Following the Hebrew tradition, animals, like the serpent, talk. Are either of these accounts of creation written to be literal stories of how God created the world? The Catechism of the Catholic Church clearly interprets the accounts of creation as addressing the ultimate questions of where did we come from and where are we going? The stories may have been the best understanding of the time as to how exactly the world came into being, but that changes over time, as we can see from one account to the next in Genesis. If so much can change in a couple of centuries, no wonder we have a different perspective a couple of millennia later. But does that make these stories redundant?